So I work at Earth 51. We're a global think tank, but we're born in the UK. And interestingly, most of the work that we do is outside of the UK. I was just speaking to Drew about that. In fact, 90% of our work takes place in Northern Central Europe, as well as a bit in the United States. And it's interesting when we talk about purpose and sustainability today, but in 2019, it was something that we believed we were trying to develop, almost getting sandwiched between organizations and, helping them become more purpose-led. So our vision statement's quite clear. We talk a lot about trying to create a better planet for future generations. I'm not getting any younger, and as a decision maker today, I'm trying to, at least inspire younger minds and younger leaders of tomorrow to try and do the right thing so that they can have a better future. So that's a little bit about why we set ourselves up. Drew also asked me, he said, what do you guys really do? I won't get into it now, but we do a lot of different things. But one of the pieces that we do work with, or some of the people that we work with, are institutions, governments. We work with organizations that are trying to drive policy and frameworks, as well as a lot of work with public and private sector. So we do a bunch of different things, especially with social entrepreneurs. So we do some work in Asia and Africa around nonprofits and trying to help people at the grassroots level. What I wanted to talk to you about today, when I scanned through that agenda about 2 weeks back, there's a lot of good thinkers in this room that are going to talk to you about AI and sustainability. I thought, let's try and do it slightly differently. So I'm going to elevate this to a 100,000-foot level and give you a big picture. Sounds fair? Yeah. So let's talk about why AI matters. I just realized I can see it over there. Okay. So let's talk about why AI matters. And the reason I say this is, although I have 25 years in tech experience, all the way from semiconductors upwards, I find that this year specifically, because of the explosion of Gen AI, there's been a lot of conversations being led by technology companies around AI, having quite a technical narrative. So everyone loves talking about large language models and supervised learning and what have you, and I don't want to talk product. Okay, so we're going to talk about, why does AI really matter? Is this something that I should really get interested with? Just a show of hands, how many of you are technically inclined? So half the room. Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. And hopefully in the next 20 minutes, I'd leave you with a bit more value than you've walked in with right now. So what I wanted to start with is a little bit of the big picture. I'll spend a bit of time on why technology matters, which includes AI. I'm not going to touch upon responsible AI too much because you've got a plethora of people after me who can talk to it much better than I do. And then I'll open up for Q&A. Okay, sounds good? 20 minutes, that's it. And we'll try and keep it a bit interactive as well, because the last thing I want to do is you listening to me for the next 20 minutes. So the big picture, and when I say big picture, you'll see why I mean really big picture. But before that, two observations that I've noticed and I've learned in the last 7-8 years with Earth 51 is there's this almost unhealthy obsession with carbon. And I'll tell you why. Because the problem with having a tunnel vision with carbon is that we seem to deviate from the other factors that contribute to it or can help us alleviate it. So you need to have a holistic picture. So it's something to keep in mind. And we've started to do more and more. When we first started, it was always about, how do we reduce your carbon emissions? Now it's a case of, okay, so how are you contributing to those carbon emissions? So let's try and take it differently. The second observation that we found in our learnings is saving the planet. And I guarantee if you look back at some of our older LinkedIn posts, we've said it as well. And I think this is wrong. That's not the narrative we should be setting. And I'll tell you why. So saving the planet almost feels like you're saving, it's somebody else's problem. And what we're trying to achieve is something different. It's not about saving the planet because the planet was here long before we started. It's going to be here long after we are gone. I guarantee that. And that's the big picture. Big picture is at the beginning of time, our planet's been around 4.5 billion years. Life on some shape and form landed around 3.7 billion years ago. So lots happened before we got here. And I've tried to do this slide for my daughter's school the other day to try and visualize how do you talk about the entire timeline since the beginning of time on a 24-hour clock. And I got this idea from the National History Museum last year. It's pretty interesting because if Earth was born at midnight, nothing much happens beyond breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Barring during our afternoon nap, we have single-cell algae that have come to fore, right? So life as we know it today hasn't really taken place, and everything we see around us is very new and recent in the overall time scale. Around 9 p.m. at night, you start to see trees and plants, land plants, not ocean plants, land plants. So again, our ecosystem, our environment is fairly new. And then we've got our apex predator friends in the form of dinosaurs that land around 10:40 at night. Okay, they roam the earth for 170 million years, which contributes just about an hour. Okay, which is quite interesting. Uh, Bless them. Unfortunately for the meteor, they're not around anymore. But we've just landed a minute back. And that shows you the scale at which we've been trying to, we talk about driving progress and we behave as if we're always going to be here. We just landed. We're very, very new to this scenario. And I like to say that we could do a better job. We're making an absolute meal of it right now across the board, be it planet, be it profit, be it, be it the environment. I think it's about trying to do more. So far, so good in terms of the big picture. That's bigger than usual picture, right? Yeah. Okay. So, and let's talk about our place around here. And I think this gives us perspective in terms of what we're trying to do. And I promise I'll bring it back to technology. This is something we call the pace of extinction. The faster we, on the left-hand side is slowing the pace of extinction. On the right-hand side, we are speeding it up. And we've got three systems and three variables we believe contribute to that. And the first one is natural systems. Everyone in this room has seen and heard a lot about this. Ocean acidification, plastic pollution, we've got deforestation and forest fires, excessive construction, which leads to floods, which leads to water scarcity and droughts. So we've seen a lot of this happening over the last few years. Natural systems will dictate how long we spend on the planet as a species. And think about this, dinosaurs spent 170 million years. We've been around 300,000 years, that's it. And we're already starting to question how future generations are going to be able to play a part in this. So one's the environment, the other is human systems. And again, it's what we do with ourselves as a species and as human beings. And again, sorry, Drew, I'm not picking on you, but you asked me, do we do any work in social equity? 100%. This is massive for us. One of the biggest contributions, or I would say debilitators of how we progress as a human society is going to be equity. And it's not a moral argument, it's actually a mathematical problem. If a species constantly reduces the power to stop using and allowing 50% of its population to flourish, it will fail. So forget the morality of it. There's an economic problem, but this is whether we succeed as a species or not. And that's why I think gender equity is a massive conversation today. So again, slightly different take on it. As we grow to a population size of about 10 billion by 2050, we're going to have 1 billion women in slums. I'm so sorry. 1 billion women in slums, and their children are going to be born in slums across the world, whilst that's 10% of the world population. And then you look at illiteracy levels. 70% of all the people who are illiterate today are women and girls. How are we making sure that they're not getting enough time on this? I'm going to spend 2 minutes on this topic because I think we always approach it from the wrong lens. We're trying to talk about it saying it's the morality behind it. It's not the morality, which it is, but it's really a question of how can we be better. We got 350 million women who are below the poverty line. Yeah, it's pretty far away. It's Africa somewhere, in sub-Saharan Africa, but that's the entire population of the United States, below $2 a day. And again, there's more that we can do. And then this is what I'm trying to get to in terms of the gender gap. Boys and girls are born equal, but something happens along the way through teenage, through adulthood, and when they're about to springboard themselves into their careers, things change. And at the end, before they're ready to get into the world and really showcase their skills, it's just 26% of a gap. So they're already starting on the back foot. And this is something to consider. But again, someone pointed out the other day saying that's Africa. No, it's not Africa or India or Asia or the global south. It's everywhere. Look in our backyard. Amongst all the women all the graduates in the European universities between a particular age range, we have more women graduates than men. 48% to 37%, which means more women are entering the workforce. But what happens when you enter the workforce? You get pegged back. For every 100 men that are being promoted, you have 87 women who get promoted. And if you're a woman of color or a minority group, only 82% of you will be promoted at every single stage. And what happens is that you have 20% fewer women at every stage. So you start 26% back, then you get pegged back because you're 20%, you're going to be pegged back at every stage of your promotion. And this doesn't happen across the board, but consider it, it's an average. So some companies are worse and some organizations are better. I think it's really important to call out that this is contributing to very weak leadership at the top. And Sue standing here introducing me is a case of a woman leader making it to the top. It's great, but it's also sad in a way because Sue's isolated in terms of the number of people that she has at the top. And this is something that Sue and I have spoken about for 2 years. How do we try and help more women leaders, be a voice for other young women coming through the ranks? This is the S&P 500 this year. 459 men CEOs to 41 women CEOs. In fact, there are more men named James, John, and Robert than men CEOs. I have a daughter, so this affects me. And I'll tell you, I have a son as well. And it's quite interesting because I know that my daughter is not going to get the same opportunities as my son. So it's personal as well now. How do we try and make a difference? And then the other piece is women don't stay in the workforce as long as men do. And again, bring it back to resources, right? It's about firing on all cylinders. Excuse me, mouth is dry. It's about firing on all cylinders. It's like the Ryder Cup yesterday. We had 12 people, with Victor not playing, it was 11. But imagine having only half a team taking on the US team. You won't win. You can't have half of your resources being able to try and drive success. It's not going to happen. Gender pay parity. Again, this is interesting because I speak to some of my male friends and they say, okay, 77% is not that big a number, is it? So then I started to figure out how to visualize it. And if you look at 77% versus $1 for every time a woman's getting paid for the same job, a man and woman could go to work on the 1st of Jan, but a woman won't get paid until the 26th of March. So for all of us in sales and business and business analysts, Q1 is wiped off. You don't get paid for it. Now again, this is not across the board. This is an average, but do consider it. We've got a lot of men in this room and a lot of young women as well, but this is something to try and consider in terms of how do we take this forward, okay? So that's about human systems. Finally, we bring it down to technology. So we started 100,000 feet. We're now putting our feet on the ground. Technology systems were never part and parcel of what we envisioned as a game changer for many years. And there's a reason behind it. So I want to talk to you about why this matters. If you just look at the GDP growth rate over the last 2,000 years, 2,025 years, in this millennium, from 180 all the way up to 1960, which is when semiconductors were effectively born, the GDP growth rate went from about $1 billion a year to $1.3 trillion a year, which is about 11x increase. But something changed in 1960, which is semiconductors. Excuse me. Semiconductors were born in 1960 with Intel and IBM. And that started to change this whole conversation. Sorry, it changed the whole lay of the land when it came to economic power. You can see the growth rate of our GDP curve. It went from $1 trillion to $110 trillion. That's a 90x increase. Nothing else changed for 1,960 years. But something changed very quickly after that for the next 65 years. And this is where technology has been able to supercharge growth rates. Let's try and keep it a bit engaging. So I changed this purposely. GDP per capita back in 1960, any guesses? And again, no one has the answers because I didn't know this myself. But any guesses on what the GDP per capita may have been in 1960? Worldwide. Average. Yeah, 50 pounds? 50? Yeah, 20, yeah, close, not bad. It was actually $450, okay? And then when you look at today, it's $14,000, okay? So things have improved per capita, even though our population has increased. This one's interesting. poverty line, everyone earning less than, say, about $2 a day, extreme poverty. Do you know how many people were in extreme poverty in 1960? 50%. Do you know how many people are in extreme poverty today? Any guesses? Is it better? Worse? 60? Worse? It feels worse, right? Actually, it's 10. So 10% of 8 billion is about 800 million people are still in poverty, extreme poverty. That's a lot of people, but things are better than they were. And then we look at literacy levels. Any idea what the literacy levels were and how many people were literate in 1960? Numbers, you can just shoot any number, it doesn't matter. 10%? Okay, it was about 42%. Someone said 40. Well done. You've seen my slides. 42%. Any idea what it is today in terms of literacy levels across the world? 70. Close, 90. 90% literacy levels. So 10% of 8 is, again, 800 million people still don't know how to read or write. So we're making progress. It is happening, although when you wake up every morning, you think, what's going on with the world today, right? Things are changing. And this one's about life expectancy. 1960. Any idea what the life expectancy was in 1960? Any guesses? 60. 45. 55. I feel like I'm playing bingo. Well done. It's 50. So I'm turning 50 this year, which means the probability of me delivering this presentation in 1960 wouldn't have happened. So I'm glad for 75 years, which is where our life expectancy is today, because it gives me a bit more time to complete this presentation. Right? But 50 years, fascinating, right? So things have improved with healthcare and changes. Technology does drive progress. And again, I'm trying to bring this back to not talking about large language models and talking about why tech matters. And again, I'm not talking about AI because AI is a subset of technology. We've come a long way from semiconductors to the internet to the mobile revolution. Yesterday we were talking about cloud, and we still are talking about hybrid cloud being in HPE's headquarters. But we're also talking about AI, and tomorrow we'll be talking about quantum. So it's a milestone. It's about how we are on this technology curve. We're evolving with it. Okay, does that help in terms of put some perspective on how this all comes together from a technology piece? And AI can be a game changer, and we keep saying that, right, with every technology that comes to the fore, but AI can exponentially change the lay of the land. And let me show you that. So McKinsey clearly called out that if we unlock every aspect of AI, and this won't happen in reality, but if we did, theoretically speaking, we would be able to get up to $25 trillion of additional revenue per year. Now that's an awful lot of money. And you put that into perspective, our world isn't really growing very fast right now. It's growing at about 3%. The UK is about 0.1% if you can smell it, right? It's not growing at all. But the Eastern economies or Asian economies are growing a lot faster. 3% GDP growth rate at this point in time. If we had a world with AI unlocked, this is how it would start to add up. So $110 trillion is our current GDP. Over the next 1,000 days, the GDP would start to expand in this rate. Again, it won't happen. This is not a reality because AI adoption is going to be way too slow. But if it does, this is why you find so many companies investing in the overall AI adoption curve. Make sense? Yeah? Okay. What have I got left? Spider-Man's uncle who said, with great power comes great responsibility. There's always a but. So we've got all this wonderful stuff about tech, and it's great to have Danfoss here because they're going to talk to you about how technology can be driven for good and as a force for good, which is wonderful to see. There are also some issues with the amount of money that I keep throwing on the chart, saying, oh, look at the amount of money we can create. A lot of that money gets concentrated amongst very few people. So the richest 1% today have more in their pockets than 95% of the world population. That is a big concern for us. In fact, you have more billionaires. I think you have something to the tune of 280 billionaires, which means every Monday morning when you wake up, you have a new billionaire. So that's a new billion. And then you got Tuesday, you got another billion. And Wednesday is another billionaire. And so every working day of the week, this week, you'll have a new billionaire. And then by the end of this year, every day of the week, you'll have a new billionaire. So that's a lot of money. But all this money, so I think there's a stat which says that 50% of all the money that we've created since 1990 has landed in the pockets of 2% of the population. we have to centralize, we have to decentralize this wealth. It's extremely important, and that's how we uplift societies. Okay, make sense? Okay, and then bringing this back to the infrastructure piece of technology, we are very well aware of how AI is going to deliver, or is going to suck and plug into a lot of electricity and power consumption over the next few years. MIT thinks it can go up as high as 21% by 2030. I don't know how real these figures could be, but it's MIT, but I thought I'd put it out there. The other piece is water consumption. And again, fresh water consumption, not salt water consumption, fresh water consumption. I'm just going to stop on that for a second because data centers are going to be consuming a lot of water to try and cool it all down. Does everyone in the room know it's fresh water versus salt water? Everyone. Everyone's going to be like, yes, I knew that. And it's not salt water because salt water is corrosive. And that's the biggest issue. And you can get fresh water from salt water, but it's so expensive. So it's becoming a huge problem in terms of how we try and address this. Again, bringing it back to the three systems, if there's something I can leave you with today, it's to understand that these three systems determine how we move forward as a species, as a civilization. So far, so good? Make sense? Yeah? Okay, great. The other piece I wanted to talk about for about 2 minutes is responsible AI, which I think is the scope of the conversation today. Now, I get asked this a lot. What is responsible AI? Because that's easy to put responsible before AI. When we look at this, we put a lot of work since 2019 when we were formed. It's everything good in terms of technology for good over the last few years. You bucket them all together and you get responsible AI. That could be the environmental side of things. It could be net zero strategy. All of that being built together culminates into responsible AI. I was trying to explain this to my daughter the other day. She's in 6th form. I said, if you get to a stage when someone asks you about what AI is and what responsible AI is, I think the way to think of it is, if AI is the brain of the computer, responsible AI is the heart of the computer. So just think of it slightly, they both work in parallel, right? And the other piece we've started to do as a think tank, so this is where we spend 90% of our day job, not on the big picture, I guarantee that. But we start to spend more time in terms of creating checklists and guidelines and guardrails on how can organizations embrace AI faster, how can they try and bring that into their fore. So we've got something called a SAFER framework. It's quite easy. It talks about sustainability, accountability, fairness, explainability, and resilience and security. So it's easy to understand. You just want to put your arms around it and say, okay, let's invest in technology, but let's do it safer, right? What have I got? I've got regulation. Everyone aware of regulation on AI in this room? A lot of people saying yes. Wonderful. So one of, I think, the most comprehensive regulation frameworks out there is the EU AI Act. I'm not sure how many of you are selling into the EU, but if you are deploying, using, buying, doing anything AI related in the EU, this matters. This act came into existence earlier this year, and in fact, AI literacy is one of the requirements, saying if you are selling any of these solutions, you better make sure that people are AI literate. And the fines are, they make GDPR pale in comparison, because it's 35 million euros or 7% of your global revenue if you get this drastically wrong. So something to consider. So I think the EU is on one side of that spectrum. The UK, I find, is sitting a bit on the fence, perhaps because of its political and strategic intentions. It's stuck between a rock and a hard place. You've got the US on one side, which is pro-innovation. We don't like regulation, if you heard J.D. Vance's speech in Munich. And on the other side, you've got EU. We've still got to be friends with our continental neighbors, right? So I don't think the UK is going to come up with a legal requirement or legally binding requirement, but they're starting to invest more and more. They're trying to make the right noises, I would say. There was a client of ours in the US who said, we don't care about it in the US. That's not true. So I actually went and read Trump's executive order in April. Responsible AI is mentioned 23 times. And in fact, if you want access to Fed funding, being a US company from Trump's coffers, you better make sure that you drive responsible AI adoption into your strategy. So there's a lot that's being said, but just go behind the scenarios and see what else is happening. If you look at Brazil, Russia, India, China, Saudi Arabia, UAE, They're all plugging responsible AI central to the AI strategy. So this is coming. Regulations coming faster than it did previously across the board. Okay. I have nothing else to share, barring if you're interested in, this is me promising my marketing team one slide on some of the education work that we do. We have a AI literacy program on responsible AI. If you want to take this for 60 minutes, it's yours. Was that useful? Thank you. Thank you for your time.